Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you very much for taking your seats. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. I'd request you to please switch your phones to silent mode. So we'll be starting with recitation from the Quran, followed by the national anthem.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. So, Saqib, thank you for giving us an opportunity to recite the national anthem twice. What could be better than that? So, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this very exclusive gathering of the top CEOs and CXOs from across Karachi and Pakistan to welcome and meet with Mr. Stephen Brobst, Global Chief Technology Officer for Teradata Corporation. I am Rabia Ahmed. I am Director and Chief Operating Officer for Natural Group. So on behalf of Natural Group and Corporate Pakistan Group, it's lovely to have everybody here this morning. Most of you are familiar with Natural Forum. That's been in the business of conference management for almost 2 decades. And a lot of you know that now Natural Group consists of 3 companies, Natural Forum, Natural Communications, which is a 360-degree communications and strategic engagements platform, and also Natural Solutions that provides HR and organizational development solutions. Everybody here is also familiar with the Corporate Pakistan Group. It is a representation of Pakistan's national intelligentsia, almost 350 members from different sectors, different industries, politicians, governors, federal ministers, secretaries, defense personnel, tech experts, media practitioners, and movers and shakers of civil society. So with this, I'd like to invite the founder of Natural Group, the founder of Corporate Pakistan Group and former Minister of State and Chairman Board of Investment, Mr. Asfar Ehsan, for his welcome note. Asfar.
Thank you, Rabia. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. On behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group and Nutshell Group, I am very grateful to all of you for your presence in today's event with our very dear friend Stephen Brobst, the Global Chief Technology Officer of Teradata Corporation. I received call of their country manager, Ghazanfar Iqbal, 3 or 4 days back. And despite very short notice, we decided to host him. Earlier, we hosted him twice in Karachi and one time in the Telenor headquarters 345 in Islamabad. And he is a true friend of Pakistan. So he's here today only for a few hours, and tonight he's going to Islamabad for next 24 hours. He was instrumental in establishing the Global Technology Consulting Center of Teradata in 2004. And we experienced his love, his working, his advocacy for Pakistan in the last almost 20 years. And he's one of the best speakers on technology and innovation, especially for the non-tech CEOs and CXOs. So despite the short notice, we decided, and I'm grateful to my friend and brother, Khurram Rahat, who is here. Actually, he introduced me first time several years back to this gentleman. Stephen, I'm grateful to you on behalf of Pakistan, on behalf of all Pakistanis, for your love, for your passion, and for your contribution towards Pakistan. I'm also very grateful to our mentor and my elder, my very dear friend, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, who is here, especially to interact with you and to listen to you. Over to you, Rabia, again. Thank you again, and after this talk, we will meet again during the lunch. Thank you.
So it's going to take a long time to introduce and tell you everything that Mr. Brobst has done. So no number of words can be enough, but briefly I'd like to tell all of you that he's a very well-known name in the tech industry. He is the founder of 3 startups in the data warehousing and e-business. Also in 2014, he was named as the #4 CTO in the US. Which was a poll conducted by ExecRank, including almost 10,000 CTOs in the United States of America. He's also served during Barack Obama's first term. He was appointed to the Presidential Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. He's the author of several journal and conference papers. He's also co-authored a book titled Building a Data Warehouse for Decision Support. And he's in the process of authoring another book, Active Data Warehousing. He's also a frequent guest lecturer at many Ivy League universities of the likes of MIT, Stanford, University of California at Berkeley, Texas A&M, and more. So let's give a round of applause to the man of the moment, Mr. Stephen Brobst.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. It's really nice to be back in Pakistan after 2 years of not traveling to the country. Very happy to be here, seeing old friends and new friends. Today, I'm going to talk about innovation. How to drive innovation at scale. And I would say in today's business environment, it's either innovate or die, because the status quo doesn't work anymore. So what we're going to do is talk about innovation, and I'm going to, can we show the slides? I'm going to describe disruption as an opportunity. Many businesses view disruption as a bad thing. You're disrupting my business. I'm running a very nice business, and all of a sudden you did something bad to the supply chain, or the marketplace changed. And I would argue disruption is a good thing. Disruption is an opportunity to reinvent and be better than we were before. And those who can take advantage of that opportunity are going to be the winners. But by the way, there'll be lots of losers. Because not everybody embraces disruption in the same way that perhaps the people in this room are going to do. Bain was a big consulting company based out of Boston in the USA, where I did my graduate work. They did an interesting study. You know, when there's no disruption, businesses just run as they run. There's not a lot of hard decisions to make. You just go with the flow. But when a disruption happens, you can really differentiate the winners from the losers. And what their study showed is that during times of, I'll say, stress and disruption, there are almost 50% more winners that become the rising stars than during the status quo times. But the bad news is almost 90% more losers. When disruption happens, the winners and the losers are very clearly differentiated. A lot of people went out of business during COVID. And some businesses excelled and grew and did amazing things. This is the difference between the winners and the losers, is their ability to handle these kinds of disruptions. And when we first encountered this disruption, COVID, I remember some people saying, oh, I can't wait until things get back to normal. And I had to explain to them, they are never going back to normal. The new normal is never normal. Disruption is now the status quo. Right? So there was a very nice article written in the MIT Technology Review about sort of, you know, reinvention and constant reinvention. And we used to think of disruptions that happened, you know, once every 10 years. You know, we had the internet disruption at the turn of the century. Then we had this big financial disruption roughly 10 years later. And then we had COVID another 10 years later. Does that mean 10 more years before another disruption? No. COVID wasn't even done yet, and we have this huge war going on with Russia invading Ukraine and so on. That was very disruptive. Still is disruptive, right? The new never normal. Disruption is something that's no longer an exception, but it's the norm. Peter Hinson from Belgium wrote an interesting book on this topic and sort of how to think differently. And what I extracted from this book is the theme is we must learn to reinvent on a constant, continuous basis. My job as Chief Technology Officer at Teradata is to help drive that reinvention. What are the new possibilities created by the technology and the uses of technology and data specifically to change the way that we do business, to change the way that our partners and customers do business? So this digital disruption, again, I would argue, it started in the 90s with the internet. But I'm going to suggest to you that really we didn't do the full digital transformation until pretty recently. We're going to come back to this point later on. And then we had this financial disruption. And then we had this biological disruption. And we're talking a lot about digital transformation. And, you know, an interesting question. Who is the driver of digital transformation in the company? Is it the CTO that drives it? Is it the CEO that drives it? Or is it the disruption that drove it? Because when you're disrupted, you have no chance but to change. Disruption makes people uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, you don't change. Because if you're not uncomfortable, you just go with status quo. Nothing changes. So these disruptions, we need to use to our advantage. And COVID-19 created a digital disruption stress test. With almost no advance notice, everything went digital. Work went digital, shopping went digital, sizing, everything went digital. And I was actually in an interview this morning with Don, and the journalist was talking about, people wondering, well, now that COVID is over, are we going to go back to the old way of working? We learned how to work digitally. Now COVID is done, let's go back to the office every day. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. That doesn't mean that we need to work 100% digital, because there are clearly advantages to being face-to-face as we are now. I would argue that for heads-down work, at least if I relate to what happened at Teradata, we actually became very productive, arguably even more productive during COVID because of virtual work. Virtual work is actually extremely efficient, because you're not wasting an hour each day, each direction, commuting back and forth and so on. But there's some things that aren't as efficient. I would argue that innovation isn't as efficient. Innovation happens with this kind of combustion that happens when you have engineers at a whiteboard arguing about what is the right way to do things. You can't really argue in a two-dimensional screen setting. It just doesn't work. So that new normal, which I would argue is a better normal for most organizations, is going to be a hybrid working environment, right? And if we think we're going to go back to the old way, then you haven't taken the opportunity to improve. It doesn't mean that we're going to stay completely virtual, because actually that's not an improvement either, but sort of picking the right balance for your organization. And some jobs, of course, you do have to be every day at the desk and so on, but I would say that that's actually the minority of the jobs, as long as you're not on the front lines interfacing with customer and so on. Most of the knowledge workers actually were very, very productive in this virtual environment, and will continue to be productive in a hybrid environment. So what happens when we have disruption? We immediately go into crisis management. Oh my gosh, the business is blowing up. Everything's falling apart around us. What do we do? What do we do? And everybody's running around. A lot of energy. Reallocation of resources. How we spend money to drive ourselves to digital. We invest in assets very differently. We take our skill sets and we organize them differently. And it drives massive innovation because we must do it. Because we must. And let's not do all that innovation and then roll back again to the status quo, because then we've lost the opportunity. Our job as leaders is to keep the momentum going forward, but of course recalibrating as the new normal adjusts itself. So we can say, well, instead of being in crisis management mode, we should have had a plan. Why didn't we have a plan? Because that disruption was unpredictable. Who would have predicted that in a very short amount of time, basically the whole world shut down from a face-to-face point of view? Completely changed the way that we interact with other people, the way that we do commerce and so on. So make a plan is delusional unless you have in your pocket a crystal ball that can tell the future. And I don't think any of us have that. They can say, the past is the best predictor of the future. Except when it's not. Except when these things are not predictable. So, incremental change can be predicted from the past. But highly disruptive change cannot easily be done in this way. The unpredictable cannot be predicted. That's why we call it unpredictable, right? Of course, we can look back and say, oh, we should have seen that coming. There were lots of people in the healthcare field that have been predicting pandemics for a long time, and By the way, COVID isn't the first one. They had more localized version with SARS and MERS and so on. But this one hit very fast and became very global. It wasn't localized like the others. So you say, oh, we should have been able to predict that because people are much more mobile than they were 20 years ago and so on. Everything is predictable in retrospect. That's easy. I really should have bought that stock 6 months ago because it went up so much. Yes, yes, of course. You know, this sort of retrospective, I should have bought the stock. This is easy. It's much harder to buy it today and know that it's going to go up 6 months from now, right? How to survive in the never normal world. And this is really the theme. I'm going to talk about 3 points, but the theme is really innovate. So what are the 3 components? Move fast. If you move slow, then you're dead. Right? Move fast. Some people purposely move slow. They said, okay, what we're going to do, this disruption happened. We're going to cut budgets, reduce expenses, and we're going to write it out, and 6 weeks it'll be done. 2 years later, it's still not really done. So this, you know, this ignoring reality, hoping is not a good strategy. Hope is not a good strategy. We can pray that it's going to get done soon. Not a good strategy, right? So what we need to do is embrace the disruption and use that to drive change, right? And do it fast. So this combination of moving fast and embracing the change is important. Now, how do you be successful in embracing change? Do you have all this energy as a bunch of individuals trying to do things? No, you collaborate. One of the things that I observe is that the organizations that do best in handling disruption are highly collaborative. So we're going to talk about what kind of organizational structures work well and don't work well in this kind of world. Okay? So Stephen Hawking, one of the most brilliant people that ever lived, he quotes intelligence as the ability to adapt to change. That's really what we're testing here. Innovation is born from the need to change. So how are we going to do that effectively? Answer, use the data. The best way to adapt to change is use the data. Make decisions not based on the gut of your stomach. And by the way, I see a lot of C-levels. That's what they do. They're generally pretty good at it because they've been in their industry for a long time. They're very experienced. They've got a lot of intuition. Except when there's disruption, everything you thought you knew is no longer true. And so I observe that under these conditions of disruption, that the people without data driving their decisions make some of the worst decisions. You must have the data. But it's a little bit tricky to have the data because when you have big disruption, the data that you had 6 months ago may not be so relevant. So this moving fast is important, right? So what am I going to do with the data? I'm going to capture the data very quickly. I'm going to monitor what's going on an hour-by-hour basis because I can't use 6 months ago data. And then I'm going to have rapid learning in an automated way. Humans learn too slow. So I want to use machine learning and deep learning and AI technologies to take that data that's happening in real time and learn continuously in real time. Now, you cannot effectively do this learning if you're working with summarized data. So I don't want just the detailed data. I want the subatomic data. If I am, for example, an airline, airlines were one of the industries that were most impacted by COVID. And it was a disaster for them, but some more than others. And I could tell which ones were smart about data and which ones weren't. Because the smart ones understood that passenger air travel went to nothing very quickly. The load factors were less than 10%, sometimes less than 5%, depending on the marketplace. And they didn't have to wait for the bookings. You could actually see, if you had the subatomic detail, the shopping that happened, it just dropped to nothing. So you didn't have to wait for the bookings to happen or not happen. You can forward project from the amount of shopping on your website or on the travel websites and so on. At the same time, huge supply chain disruption, and the smart ones figured out how to pivot from carrying passengers to carrying cargo. In the airline industry, cargo was like the poor cousin, because passenger, that's where all the revenue was. Cargo is just something to put in the belly to, fill the plane and get a little extra revenue on the side. And the smart airlines were seeing this supply chain disruption happening, and they were, ripping out seats of their planes and creating cargo space and totally changing their business. And how fast you're able to do that, it's not just changing the configuration of the plane, it's changing the routes. Supply chain routes look very different than passenger routes. So how fast were they able to change the routes and serve their customers? Once you capture that market in the new normal, now you've got it. And now the other guys have to try to take it away. It's much harder to take it away once you've got it. The ability to see it in the data. If you wait till the end of the week to look at the data, that's way too late. Way too late. Now I want you to ask yourselves, you don't have to say it out loud. I want you to give you an honest assessment to yourselves. Are you a brittle organization or are you a resilient organization? Just think to yourself. Which one would you rather be? I hope that one's obvious. Resilient, absolutely. But how many of us really are in resilient organizations? So let me characterize. You have to answer to yourself honestly. I'm not going to make you raise your hand, so you don't have to worry about that, right? A brittle organization is a top-down command and control. The CEO says, do it this way, and everybody runs around to do it, and all the way down the organizational hierarchy, they are executing to that command. Brittle organizations are highly optimized. Their supply chain is extremely optimized to get the most efficiency, to squeeze the most out of that supply chain. But because it's so optimized, there's no room for disruption, because if you disrupt, then the whole thing falls apart. And I've seen that in a lot of organizations, that they had these highly optimized, very efficient, very money-saving supply chains or other kinds of organizational processes that were not resilient in the face of unplanned, unexpected disruption. Brittle organizations are designed to avoid failure. We are so smart, we're going to plan for all the possibilities of bad things that might happen, often referred to as scenario planning. We're going to do all the scenario planning, and we're going to have, if this happens, then we're taking this action. If that happens, we're taking a different action, and we will not fail. We will not fail. How well did that work during the financial crisis for the banks? Not very well. Government ended up bailing out a lot of banks. The reality is it was really more of a northern hemisphere crisis, if you really look at what was going on, but the cascading effect ended up being pretty global, right? I'm going to propose that we don't like these characteristics in an organization designed to innovate. In an organization designed to innovate, I want self-organizing structure and communication. I think this is very, very powerful. It's not about roles and responsibility, and this is my job and that's your job. No, because that means that you're not really collaborating. This is what's in management speak called Taylorism. Everybody has their job, they live in that little world, and you're not collaborating. If there is a big problem to solve, I want to get all the smart people and swarm it with those smart people and forget about titles and departments and all that kind of stuff. Get the smart people to work on the hard problem, solve the problem, get that out of the bottleneck space into the solve problem space, and you'll be much more successful. Self-organizing teams, where people aren't paying attention to hierarchy and titles and those kinds of things. Right? You know, as CTO, I made a very interesting, you can call it request or demand, when I took this job. My demand was, I will take the CTO job, but I want 0 direct reports. A lot of people find that strange. What, you're a CTO and you have no direct reports? How can that be? Right? You need to have a big department of people that do things for you. I believe that my power as CTO comes from collaboration and working with all the teams and not having people listen to me because they work for me, but listening to me because I'm bringing good ideas. And so it's the power of knowledge driving the collaboration, not the power of organizational hierarchy driving the collaboration. This is part of this self-organizing structure. Right? The startup company that Teradata acquired, bunch of people that worked together for many, many years, no titles. We had no titles in the company. Now, for a startup company that's relatively small, you can do that. I know you can't do that for a large enterprise, but it's philosophically not thinking about structure. So in Teradata, anybody can call up or write an email to the CEO. And nobody gets mad about it. So I see in some organizations, if you do what's called skip level, they get really annoyed, right? I think that that's not good for collaboration and innovation. Right? Highly adaptive, embracing the change, excited about change, a learning organization. So a brittle organization tries really hard not to fail, designed not to fail. A resilient organization says failure is actually an opportunity to learn. That's a good thing. If you don't fail, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're not innovating. I would argue if you're not failing, then you're doing only incremental change to what you've been done, and that's why you're not failing. So when I talk to organizations about innovation, I talk about a portfolio approach. So you should have some things that you work on which are incremental change to the things you're already doing. And the probability of success of those things is probably 90%. But it's only incremental change. The benefit you get is 10, 20%. And it's important to do that. It's part of continuous improvement on anything that you do. I would argue that 60% of your innovation should take you a little bit out of your comfort zone. Now, more than incremental, because that's not out of your comfort zone at all. That's just improving what you're already doing. So what I mean by this level of innovation is you have a foot. So this foot is in your comfort zone, and this foot you need to step out of your comfort zone and do something different with the core capabilities you already have. And your likelihood of success, because you've got one foot clearly planted in your core capabilities, your probability of success is probably around 70%. But you're still going to fail, but that's okay. 30% failure is not a bad thing. And actually, I'm going to argue that the more you fail, the more you're learning and the more you're innovating. As long as you don't fail twice in the same way, that's not allowed, because that means you're not learning very well. 10% of the things you do should be complete moonshots, we call them. A complete no foot in your core capabilities. Just do a completely different thing. And 90% of the time you're going to fail, but when you hit it, you're going to hit it big. It's going to be a big change. And so, you know, your investment portfolio, if you're in financial services, if a stockbroker comes to me and says, you know, I am a great stockbroker, and all the customers I worked with, I've never lost them a single rupee. This is not a good stockbroker. It means he's taking no risk. He's not got a properly balanced portfolio. I want a properly balanced portfolio if I'm making investments. And by the way, your innovation is an investment. So you also have to have a balance. I don't want everything to be a moonshot because then it's hard to fund it. But I don't want everything to want to be incremental improvement because then I've got very low returns, probably not better than inflation. Good balanced portfolio. Thomas Edison is an inventor from the US who I view as one of the most innovative people in terms of the number of things that he invented and the diversity of things that he invented. Electricity and you know, the phonograph and, you know, all kinds of things. And what's not talked about enough is all of his failures. People know all these cool things that he invented. This quote from him I really like. I've not actually failed, I just found 10,000 ways that wouldn't work. And I learned from each one of those. And eventually I created something. In order to innovate effectively, you have to be able to fail fast and cheap. Because fast and cheap failure is fast and cheap learning. And that allows me to learn, because if the learning is cheap, then I can do more of that failure. And then at the end of it, I get a success. I eventually hit the pot of gold. Right? So I'm from Silicon Valley, born and raised there before it even was called Silicon Valley. And I remember being in Germany at this innovation forum. And it was myself and some CTOs from some German companies, big companies like Deutsche Telekom and Lufthansa and these kind of big companies. And someone from the audience asked, you know, in Germany, we've got a lot of smart people. We've got a good university system. We have, you know, a very engineering discipline in Germany. It's very famous for this kind of culture. Why don't we have a Silicon Valley? Why is there no Silicon Valley in Germany? And everybody looks at me because I'm the Silicon Valley guy on the panel. And I spent enough time and worked enough in Germany to be comfortable in asking this question. My answer was, because you're afraid to fail. I agree with you. There are a lot of smart people, great universities, great, you know, engineering culture, but you're afraid to fail. You punish failure. The culture is punishing failure. And this is no good because you're punishing learning. And so when you learn something, you don't tell anybody about it because to learn it, you had to fail and don't want anybody to know about my failures. And so embracing failure is actually really important. Right? This collaboration is really important. If we look at the first half of the 20th century, almost all Nobel Prizes were won by individuals. If you look at the second half of the 20th century up until now, most Nobel Prizes are teams of people, not individuals. Teams of people collaborating. So we need to remember this. It's not about individual contributors as much as it is about people who collaborate well. When I'm hiring a brilliant data scientist, she might have the best mathematical skills in the world and brilliant business insights and so on, but you know, if she's just sitting down in a room and we're putting pizza under the door and getting mathematical models out, I don't hire the person because they need to be able to collaborate. Right? So this collaboration is very, very important. Embrace chaos. Chaos is disruption, right? And disruption is opportunity to learn, opportunity to change, and embracing it will change how you approach the ability to improve your business, the ability to improve your government. I like this idea of the chief destruction officer. How many companies have a chief destruction officer? So what you're seeing in the picture is a statue at what I would call the most innovative meeting of brilliant people that I've ever gone to. It's a very alternative, diverse festival called Burning Man. It's in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles from any real population, real city. And crazy things happen there. And there's all kinds of stuff that you can get into. Some of it troublesome, some of it not. But one of the things they do at the end of the festival, they have this big man and they burn it down to the ground. And that is symbolic to next year it's going to be better. You burn it down and then you start again, right? Because sometimes you need to burn down the house in order to make something better in its place. And so what we observe is that, you know, if you keep heading in a particular direction, then you're going to land where you're headed. And that might not be good, because there are a lot of, I'll say, directions that we are currently headed in the society which might not be so good. Geopolitical disruption is already happening, right? So for 10 years ago, we talked a lot about globalization and the sort of global connected economy and so on. And right now, there's some sort of extreme nationalism going on here, and it's slowing things down and being disruptive. Not so good. But we have to deal with that, right? Our business models have to deal with that kind of disruption. This one is one I'm very concerned about, which is ecological disruption, right? We are slowly killing the planet. And when I say slowly, it's accelerating. So I won't be able to say slowly for very much longer. And we're already seeing this massive ecological disruption in terms of floods and other kinds of natural disasters, extreme heat, extreme hurricanes and tsunamis and so on. This is all related to this ecological disruption. Could have a whole conversation on that, but I'll avoid doing that. So we talk about chief destruction officer and burning down the house. I recommend that you engage in this practice called zero-based transformation. So rather than looking at what you're doing today and making incremental changes to it, take a step back and say, what if I didn't have any of this existing stuff? How would I like it to be? Blank pages. Rewrite the book. And think about what that best practice might be if you weren't chained to the way that you've been doing things for the last 10 years. Because one of the greatest enemies of innovation is inertia. Whenever someone says, but that's the way we've always done it, that's a great reason to not do it that way anymore. Right? Work backwards from where you would like to be. Because incrementalism, here's where we are. We want to go in this direction. Let's take one step and one step and one step, very incremental. If you can envision where you would like to be and then work backwards and then kind of make them meet in the middle, this is very powerful. It'll get you to think in a different way from an innovation perspective. So I'm going to give you some tips that I use to encourage my teams how to innovate. Right? Follow the tangents. You know, a lot of people when they travel, they get these guidebooks, you know, a Lonely Planet guidebook or something like that. And everybody's watching the guidebook and they go, here, okay, turn right there, turn left there, and so on. And they see all the same thing. One of my favorite things, I'm a big, big traveler. One of my favorite things to do is get lost. Getting lost is great. Just go wherever it takes, you know. Go into those little streets in Lahore and wander around and don't worry about a map and get lost, you know. I've never been permanently lost. It's okay. And you discover new things you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Getting lost is a great experience. And when you're innovating, just follow your ideas. You don't need to see exactly where it's going. Follow your ideas, follow your intuition, right? This breeds creativity. Look for best practices in industries other than your own. One of the banks that I work with in Singapore, they were going through this digital transformation project. And the team sort of had this plan, and the team presented the plan to the CEO. And part of the plan was they were going to go out and benchmark themselves against the best-of-breed banks. Who's doing digital really well? And we're going to benchmark against them, and then we're going to sort of figure out what we can do. And the CEO rejected the plan. Said, why would we benchmark against banks in digital transformation? If we're the best bank, we are the queen of the pigs. Because banks are not the example of digital transformation. Let's benchmark across all industries. Why as a bank wouldn't we look at Amazon or eBay or people in a different industry that are challenging the way that people think about digital, not just being trapped in your own industry? And there are lots of examples of this. If we look at condition-based maintenance in the manufacturing business, right, and being able to reduce the cost of maintenance and reduce the number of failures by 30% using data for condition-based maintenance versus milestone maintenance. Why aren't we doing that in human healthcare? Right? So there's all kinds of opportunities for cross-fertilization. Question the status quo. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Do something different. Try it. You may fail. There might be a reason why all the fish are swimming in this direction, because there's a big shark over there and you're swimming toward it. So you need to be able to adapt quickly when you run into the sharks, but at least you should try. Ask a child for advice. Now, why do I put this one up here? Well, when you're innovating, one of the problems is that people are afraid to question the status quo. And they're afraid to ask questions even. And so my nephew, when he was a little kid, I would actually explain to him what I was working on, which seems really strange, a CTO of a company explaining to a 7-year-old what you're working on. What was beautiful about that is a 7-year-old will ask any question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. But when you're working with your peers, they all have these set of assumptions, and they don't get out of the zone. You all have these shared assumptions, and they won't ask questions. They won't challenge the status quo. 7-year-old is not afraid. Now, once they're a teenager, they're useless, right? So you really got to get them young before they've been corrupted by our educational system and our peer pressure and so on. But if you get them young, the children will challenge your thinking in a very productive way. And you're going to have to explain, say, Uncle Steve, why do you do it this way? I say, yeah, why do we do it that way? Why can't we think it? So he would challenge me in ways, even though we're having a very sort of simple level conversation. If you can't explain what you do to someone that knows nothing about the domain, then you don't really understand it, right? So it will challenge you. You don't know something until you teach it, right? And if you can teach it to a 7-year-old, you can teach it to anybody. Do more listening and less talking. In meetings, I observe that there are certain people, we all know who they are, that like to monopolize the airtime. They think their contribution is based on how many minutes they're talking. And I would argue there's much bigger contribution by how many minutes I'm listening and learning and processing and collaborating. Collaborating is not one person dominating all the time and putting forth his or her ideas all the time, right? We need to give everybody, and different personalities. So if you're the team lead, you need to make sure that everybody gets a voice, right? Everybody gets a voice. Invite the randomness. Don't try to plan for every eventuality. Build a resilient organization that can take the unexpected and make something good of it. And this one was really hard for me, actually, because I'm an engineer. I don't like, the game that I play is chess. Chess is great. There is no luck, right? There are no dice. There are no drawing of cards and so on. It is pure skill. I love that game. Right? but it's not realistic because the real world has a lot of randomness in it. The real world has a lot of dice throwing, right? And so that was one of the hardest ones for me to deal with because for me, if it's not rational and predictable and so on, then it's not good. But actually, randomness is good. It creates opportunity. Separate the brainstorming and the evaluation. The brainstorming is the ideation, and too often when you're ideating, people always want to shoot it down. Oh no, we tried that already. Oh, that won't work for this reason and so on. I don't let anybody do the evaluation during the brainstorming. All ideas are good ideas. Get them up there. And then we don't talk about why it's going to fail. We talk about why it's going to succeed. Take a positive view to it. Now again, you have to be rational, of course, but the first step is positive, not negative. Take a shower. Nothing personal. What I mean by this is sometimes when you think too hard about something, you're beating your head against the wall, you just need to take a step back. So it means take a shower. Some people, artists, very creative people, they smoke a cigarette. And I'm from California. I would never recommend you smoke a cigarette, right? Because that's our culture. We don't do that. But take a shower, take a walk. My release is I go take a walk. I go take a hike. And I don't constantly think about the same thing, but in the back of my mind, it's working, right? And then when I'm done, I'm going to have a good idea when I come, almost always. Change your routine. Use different tools, use different processes, challenge the way that you do things to create variation. That will create more opportunity. Right? And so we need to educate our young people to think creatively. Right? We talk about, our data scientists and our brilliant people. When I was on this council of advisors for Barack Obama, there was a big emphasis at that time on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I think we got it wrong. I believe in all these things. I'm an engineer. Of course I believe them. Right? But if we just teach these things, we actually teach people to be robotic in solving mathematical problems. So I don't like STEM, I like STEAM. Art and creativity is very important, right? And giving someone a more well-rounded education and to think creatively and these things that are going to make them uncomfortable because it's not a mathematical equation is actually good for them. So I want to end with this quote, which is attributed to Winston Churchill, but I don't think he actually ever said it. Right? What was it? Oh, Machiavelli. That I believe more. But Winston Churchill always gets the credit for this. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Disruption is crisis, and this is an opportunity. It's not a bad thing. Right? So with that, I thank you very much for spending this time with me. And I'll turn it back over to our host.
So there's time for a few questions and answers. We'd like the audience to interact with Stephen. Please.
Use the microphone.
Challenges that, the technological challenges which are ahead of us. The one key question is unemployment disruption, which, I would like to understand. You talk about the massive changes in the technology and the push that as a third world country we are facing from the developed world to make changes, like e-commerce has come and the various platforms has come over the years. The country like Pakistan, where there are 30 million unskilled labor, which is there, and every year 1 million people are added to that unskilled labor. Now, if as a country we adopt these changes at a faster pace, then on the other hand, here in the countries like Pakistan or the third world countries, we have a massive challenge to provide the employment opportunities to the unskilled labor. How would you balance these things in your overall concept?
I am a huge proponent of investing in education. I think unskilled labor is actually going to be difficult to sustain. I think we have to bring skill to the people, right? And you talked about the disruption there. Let me give you one interesting fact, right? More than 50% of all males in the United States without a college degree drive for a living. Taxi cabs, Ubers, forklifts, trains, there's many things that they drive. I will suggest to you that within 10 years, those jobs all disappear. Because AI algorithms will do the driving. Self-driving cars are a reality. It won't disappear overnight, but that will happen. Most trains in the US today are not driven by humans anymore, for example. And soon, not that soon, but a decade or so, that will start to happen with cars as well. You can already have cars that park themselves. Now we got to get them to drive, and those jobs are all going to disappear. So that's a problem, right? If 50% of the males without college education, so you can maybe argue that's some kind of unskilled labor, right? Those jobs are going to go away. We need to invest in those people and give them meaningful work that is going to contribute to society and make them happy. Now, Finland actually did a very interesting study. It said, well, the people developing these AI algorithms are going to make lots of money. So what we're going to do is we're going to tax them and redistribute the money to the people who didn't have jobs because they got put out of a job, and we'll give them a minimum sustainable income. And what the study showed is that they had a very high suicide rate because even though they had enough money to live, they were not feeling like they were meaningful in their contribution to society and so on. So it's not enough just to give people money. We need to give them the skills to contribute and participate in society and so on. So I'm a huge, huge proponent of investing in education. And we understand that these, like AI doesn't put people out of business, it puts skill sets out of business. We need to understand what skills go out of business and what the new ones should be. Just like in automotive manufacturing, there used to be huge people working on the manufacturing lines. Now there aren't. And we did reskill the people in that industry. Right? So we need to continue in that thinking.
Hi, my name is Ahsan Jamil. I'm the CEO of the Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance. You mentioned your concern around the disruption of climate change. And from a perspective of business, ESG is something that has caught on a lot in the West and is something that is making its way through the requirements of global capital necessitating that. What advice do you have for us about embracing ESG, and how do you think that is a disruption that we should embrace?
I believe that ESG is a way of dealing with the disruption that will happen if you don't do it, right? And my view is for ecological sustainability. So ESG is more than just ecological sustainability. So I'm going to narrow it down to this particular piece. The key to dealing well with it is transparency through data. Now, I'm a data guy, so the answer is always going to come back to data. But I like to quote Peter Drucker, a management guru from Austria, very famous. He's not with us anymore. He made the statement, you can't manage what you don't measure. So we need to be able to measure our carbon footprint. So we're working with companies, and you say the West, you're being very generous. I would say the Nordics and Germany. Those are the ones that are ahead. I would say the US is way behind where they should be. Given the development of the economy, they are way behind in this thinking, right? And I'm not going to get too much into politics, but let's just say the Nordics and Germany are much better. And I've worked personally with companies that are sort of taking the capabilities they have in activity-based costing, where they measure, how many euros of revenue and how much euros of cost and build profitability models. Now they're taking those and repurpose them to carbon cost. So now the cost is not only the cost to my bank account, it's the cost, the externalities to the environment. And pretty soon the governments, especially in the Nordics, they're going to actually start charging an externalities tax when you have this kind of pollution. So it's going to come very soon that there will be economic incentives lined up to take care of these externalities. And so we need to measure so that we can manage. So that transparency is, I think, very, very important. And then we can build machine learning models that look at economically sustainability and ecological sustainability at the same time. Because if I do all this ecologically sustainable stuff, but I'm not economically sustainable, I'm doing great things, but I'm out of business in 2 years, so my good things stop. So we need to find the overlap in the Venn diagram. So I was working with a bank last week in Europe, and we were building this model where the loans that I make, I can choose to make them to, I'll call them dirty businesses or clean businesses. Which one would you rather do? So now part of the input is the carbon impact of the business that I'm making the loan to. So this is called scope 3. It's not just my impact, it's the impact of my actions. Scope 3 and the scope 1, 2, 3, if you're familiar with the ESG framework. All comes down to data. Visibility through data.
May I have the pleasure of using this mic now? Thank you very much. Stephen, I think you've been complimented for excellent presentation. What I noticed that in your entire presentation, you did not use a single jargon. The mumbo-jumbo of jargon that comes from global chief technology officers, none of it was there. The difficulty with most CEOs is that they can't communicate with the CTOs because the CTO thinks he's speaking English while the CEO thinks that he's speaking Latin. I think that's where the dichotomy takes place in terms of strategizing for things that you have mentioned. If we can just go back to your slide about chaos.
Put my slides up. It's a little ways back here. Oh, there it is.
Every single thing that you spoke about while you were presenting and the subject that you were presenting, the pictorial that you used was amazing. Consider me your 7-year-old nephew now. Why this picture for chaos? What's the background to this picture?
So in the US, we have a saying that when something is working well, you throw a monkey wrench into the engine and it breaks the engine. So this monkey is coming into your process and making a mess of it. So monkeys, at least in US culture and the children's books and so on, it's always a mischief maker. And they will come in and do things that you don't expect. So that's why he represents this chaos thinking.
Look more ferocious than mischievous. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very nice lecture discourse. My question is, with artificial intelligence, AI, moving fast, growing fast, and self-learning computers learning very fast, and we are approaching singularity. We might approach singularity sooner than later. How do you think we can how can we or should we prepare ourselves for this disruption which is going to emanate from when we achieve singularity? Vis-a-vis the self-learning computers, when they decide that when they become out of control of the humans.
Yeah, so the singularity is talked a lot about in science fiction and some philosophers and so on. My view is we're very far away from that. People have an overinflated idea of what quote-unquote AI will do. And so people ask, oh, aren't you afraid of AI because, it's going to become, it's like Terminator 2 where the AI sort of becomes a thinking thing and takes over the world and kills all the human and so on. And I would say that that's like worrying about running out of parking on Mars, right? So we're thinking now about, how to get to Mars. And if you start thinking about we're going to run out of parking spaces in Mars, we're getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves. The reality is AI is really only effective in very tactical decisions, very narrow AI decisions. Strategic thinking, creativity, and so on, we're very, very far away from that. Now, eventually, yes, philosophically and science fiction writers, absolutely, that's a good thing to be writing about and thinking about. But right now, we've got much bigger problems to solve just to get the basic stuff right.
Sir, I'm Asif Ismail from Premier Cables, MD Premier Cables, manufacturing optical fiber cables based from the last 58 years. Amazing presentation, you made our day. Wisdom comes from experience and learning, so we are getting from you. My question is, you said disruption and problem is opportunity. In other words, change the problem into opportunity. In current scenario of all around the world, especially our country, we are having a lot of financial constraint. Have to pay a lot of funds to donor agencies. Do you think in the current scenario where a lot of third world country, especially Pakistan, where we are not having a lot of professionals and a lot of good educated and loyal, honest people, do you think in current scenario in our country, we can get through from these sort of situation when we are not having top professionals from Pakistan?
Well, I guess I would challenge that statement because as Teradata, the reason we made the decision to build the GDC here is because we're absolutely finding top professionals. They're very motivated, they're very honest, they're very... So my experience actually isn't consistent with the statement that you just made, and so maybe I'm just lucky, but we made investments, right? So I personally worked with over a dozen universities in Pakistan and built with them curriculums for both computer science students and MBA students, like at LUMS and NIST and others, that then got deployed. So you have to make investment to get return. And we made investment, and I would say we got a much bigger return than the investment we made. So I think that you get what you expect. If you have low expectations, you will get low performance. If you set high expectations, my experience is you get high returns. And so for me, my experience is quite different. But let me address one point you made about, resources are constrained. I understand that, right? There's a quote that I like to repeat. Too much money makes you stupid. When you don't have a lot of resources, you have to innovate to solve problems. Here's an example. US healthcare. We spend twice as much money as any other country per capita. Is our healthcare system better than Sweden, who spends half as much? Absolutely not, right? So actually I think that lack of resources actually makes you smarter, because you have to, innovation sort of comes from, having to solve a problem with limited resources. If you're just throwing money at stuff or throwing people at stuff, you can solve any problem, but you're not doing it efficiently. That's what we in the US do with healthcare, I would argue. And I'm getting a little bit political here, but I really do believe that lack of resources can sometimes be a good thing, not a bad thing, because you're forced to innovate. But you got to set expectations really, really high.
That means these talented people should get chances from this beautiful country as well, home in the future as well.
Well, so to your point, our GDC, it serves Pakistani customers, but it actually serves global customers. Our GDC people, they get to travel the world, right? They go work for companies all over the world. We give them that's part of the opportunity. We set high expectations, but we give them high rewards for doing that. And by the way, some of them get hired away. I was actually on the flight coming here. I came from Stockholm, and I ran into a guy that used to work at our GDC, and now he's working at a big bank in Sweden. He says, yeah, I'm not working at the GDC anymore. One of our customers hired me. Actually, I think that's great. Because if we can get our smart people from the GDC hired into our customers, smart customers are better customers. So I don't like if I lose one of my great people to the competition, but if I lose to a customer, that's not losing them. That's actually amplifying the capability.
We have example of Asfar. I hope he was doing a great job. I hope he'll get the answers.
So lunch is also ready.
Big hands to Asfar. He has done good work.
So lunch is almost ready. I want to answer you, in my humble opinion. We have enough resources in Pakistan. And I'm saying this with complete responsibility. What we need is sincerity with our cause, with our purpose, and also the will to do it. I spent a few months in the power corridors, and I'm saying this with complete responsibility, that there is an opportunity of few billions of dollars in every industry. It's up to us. It's not up to others, actually. So our problem is internal. There is a need of collaboration. There is a need of understanding and consensus on 15, 20 big issues in the country. we should work on charter of economy. So our talent is brilliant, our talent is working globally, and there is no problem, there is no lack of resources in Pakistan. We have enough human resources, we have enough resources in the power corridors also, and we have enough natural resources also. Our problem is internal, and solution is also up to us, not any external thing. But this is my humble view.
Just a quick
Since
question.
our time is limited, so we'll take the last two questions, please. Yes, please, sir.
Okay, thank you very
There's
much.
a quote that
If
it
the lady
ain't
go first, or then?
if it ain't broken, why fix it? So if something is working and successful, then why disrupt it?
So if it's not broken, don't fix it, drives inertia and status quo, and I would argue there's always opportunity to improve. No matter how good something is, it can be better. And you can do that through incremental improvement, which I recommend 30% of your innovation investment, but you can also do it through more radical innovation, which is what I would argue 60% of your investment should be done in. So I think that if we're satisfied with where we are now, then we're not going to make enough progress. So that's why I do like to break it. That's why I like this idea of chief destruction officer, right? Chief destruction officer breaks something that's not broken because we're going to burn it down and do something even better, right?
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Shoaib. I'm in the financial services industry, so my question is related to that. And I hope certainly you have exposure to different markets. So my questions, actually there are two questions which are very related. And one is on the demand side and the supply side of financial services. So in Pakistan, what we see is that despite, obviously we are talking about technology, everything is possible in a paperless manner. Despite that, we see every bank opening new branches every day, and people have this liking to go to the branches. I've seen in many other countries of the world where people don't go to the branches, they do everything online. So how do we change that mindset, or can you give us some clue on that? That's one thing, because people still have a liking to kind of go deal with the financial matters in a physical manner, to put it in that way. And the other side is on the supply side, that Pakistan is a big country. We have 220 million people, as you said, talented, young, educated people. But despite that, our technology exports or technology output, to say in a different manner, we are lagging far behind in India. So India financial services exports are $250 billion. Our IT exports are now close to $2 billion. There's a huge gap. So do you have any advice for us as a nation what to do to kind of improve the situation? Thank you.
So the first question, I think part of the behavior you're observing is a little bit generational, right? So I would expect that the young millennials here or US or anywhere else in the world, they don't want to go to a bank branch. They want to do everything online. My grandmother, she likes to go to a bank branch. She goes every Friday and has coffee and cookies with the branch manager, and she's got enough investment that he has to pretend he likes it. And so it's generational. But my grandmother's the cash cow because she's worth a lot to the bank. My little sister's not worth very much because she's just starting her career and got a lot of debts to pay off from university and so on. And so my grandmother, the cash cow, is funding the innovation that is going to help drive the digital experience for my little sister. So that's the way you have to think about it. I would not, even though we're clearly, at least in the US, shifting to a digital economy, right, doesn't mean I would recommend shutting down all branches, because then you kill the cash cows. But slowly, the branch investment is going to fund the digital transformation, right? So that's the first question. The second question is around the supply, the supply of the resources globally, and you're comparing yourselves to India. I think that's a marketing problem. I think that, quite frankly, India has outmarketed Pakistan in the area of the capabilities of the skills that are available and so on. And that's why, to be a little bit selfish, that's actually benefited us because we get to cherry pick from any of the universities because we made a big decision to create a big critical mass here relative to other companies. But clearly there are more people figuring it out. I know that there are other big companies that are doing more and more sort of sourcing of talent from Pakistan. What I think is important for the nation is that you give them the opportunity to be successful in the nation rather than having a brain drain where someone has to move out of the country in order to be successful and do a startup and so on. So there needs to be some funding model for people to do startups and so on. So not only outsourcing for others, but also you want to start generating innovation within the country. And that means a sort of venture capital type of infrastructure which is not as strong here as it is in India or in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, hi. My name is Rizwan. Thank you for the last wonderful 90 minutes or so, really learning experience. I'd like to touch upon the same topic which was mentioned earlier about AI, singularity, and all of that. So people like Elon Musk, leaders like Elon Musk, are also, giving a picture of AI which is a bit too scary than it should be. Similarly, we hear that Facebook had a computer or a sort of program which sort of invented its own language and they had to shut it down. Could you give us some more insights into what's happening? Because that's something which probably we will not know, you would know, number one. And number two, what you mentioned, parking problem on Mars. Is this too much of, not, looking at the risk in too much detail with that comment? I mean, is that an underestimation of risk? What would you say? Because I think the next disruption could be where, AI really comes in and takes over a lot of things.
Yeah, so let me go to the second part of the question. Like the Facebook example that you're referring to is basically they had two agents that were meant to negotiate. And all it really did was take English language, which is overly verbose, and convert it to a coded language, which really had a very easy mapping back and forth. All they did is reduce the number of bits that had to be exchanged for a very narrow task. So this example that you give is an example of what I would call narrow AI, and I think that AI can be very good at that. But that negotiation there was nothing really creative in what was going on there, really. And so I think there's a long time before, again, we're going to have this creative strategic thinking from a deep learning program. You can do exhaustive search, try all the different possibilities and see which one comes out the best. So that one will work because we can brute force that. That's why, for example, is chess, and I hate to say this, but is chess a creative game? At some level it is, but when you have so much computation and brute force, you can try every single combination, and then it just took the creativity out of it. And that's why the world champion of chess is now a machine, because you've got enough computation to just try every combination, right? Well, and Go as well, right? So in chess and Go, any game which is has a deterministic outcome, can be, and eventually brute force. Like, for example, in the game of checkers, which is a very simple game, I would be happy to play anybody in this room. We'll play 50 games of checker. And if you win even one game, I give you $100. But if you don't win any game, you have to give me $100. That's like 50 to 1 odds. But if you understand checkers, you will never lose. A simplified version of that is tic-tac-toe. Right? Obviously, if you understand tic-tac-toe, you will never lose. Checkers is a little bit more difficult than tic-tac-toe, but same thing. Chess is really a more sophisticated version of checkers at some level, right? It's just much more sophisticated because it is deterministic. Yeah.
So we're going to take absolutely the last question, as we have to feed all you good people as well. So Hamza.
Thank you, Rabia. Stephen, always a pleasure attending your talk. My question is that in Pakistan these days there is a raging controversy about the possibility of organizing general elections through electronic voting machines and through internet voting. So there was a law, but it has been replaced by the new parliament. So what, in your expert opinion, because you are a world authority on data sciences and computer engineering, can general elections on a scale for a country like Pakistan of 220 million people be held with transparency and credibility through EVMs, the electronic voting machines, and through internet voting for the overseas Pakistanis.
Yeah, so with electronic voting machines, I would argue that's hopefully not actually about data science, because it should be direct, my vote counts for one vote and so on. And what I personally, now this is a personal opinion, I'm not expressing Teradata opinions and so on. My personal opinion is my main concern is if we exclude certain audiences, right? So if there are certain people who are not comfortable with technologies and those people won't come to the voting booth because they're afraid of the technology, and then you lose the voice of those people, that's what I get concerned with, right? So I think there need to be some options so that I don't have to, face technology. And we in this room, they say, oh, who would be afraid of technology? There are a lot of people that are uncomfortable with technology. And you don't want to exclude the voice of those people. So I'm actually less worried about the technology. I'm more worried about inclusion of everybody. Everybody gets a vote, right? And there's lots of studies that show if you have only the electronic voting machine, then you will lose certain populations in their participation in the elections, which you probably don't want to do. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
So what an amazing 90 minutes we've had, and we actually couldn't tire of listening to you all day, but as I said, we have to feed everybody, as lunch is definitely an incentive to be at such events. It is important here to thank Teradata for today, as well as for our continued collaboration with them for the past 2 decades. Before we break for lunch, I'd like to invite Fatima Asad Saeed to present the vote of thanks. Fatma is a CPGN. She's also the president and CEO of Abacus Consulting. She's on the board of trustees of the Lahore University of Management Sciences and on the board of directors of Faisal Bank and Kashf Foundation, among others. Fatima, over to you. Thank you, Stephen.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'll be very quick. I know that lunch is awaiting, and thank you for this opportunity. I would speak for perhaps on behalf of all of you that was an extremely insightful presentation, Stephen. Thank you very much for sharing those thoughts. And I believe it resonates with all of us over here as business leaders and those who are change makers and decision makers as well. And one of the things that I really believe that is the hallmark of our country is that we thrive in chaos. I think that we get very restless if there is no chaos, and we emerge stronger and we emerge better. And that is, I believe, one of the, as Asfar also pointed out, that we take it upon ourselves to really understand where we need to go, despite the chaos, despite the confusion and perhaps mixed signals that we get from different levels. It is about, at the end of the day, how do you keep that end in sight? And what do you want to do as a citizen of this country, and then as the steward of the organizations that we represent? Because at the end of the day, what you say about embracing the chaos and also the end in sight, it is our collective responsibility to leave a better world for the next generation. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, everybody. And lunch is now served. So let's meet in the hall outside. Thank you very much, Stephen, once again. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out on a working day and to be with us and to give be such a brilliant audience today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for attending. Yes. I'm going to the northern area. Oh, where? All over the place, actually. We go to different places.